No reira ka mihi ake rā ki o koutou katoa, ko tai mai. Ki te whakarongo atu ki enei tino toki, o enei tūmomo āhuatanga, enei o ngā mahi, no reira ka mihi ake rā ki o koutou, o tira ki o koutou katoa, no reira ka mihi ake. When Pātara Te Tuhi edited the first Te Hokioi magazine in 1862, he did that against the backdrop of a crown that was agitating inside, not just of Waikato Maniapoto, but across the country. The purpose of Te Hokioi at that time was to offer a narrative so that we could express our views as Māori in a much more wider format. Newspaper format at that time, probably akin to some of the changes that we're seeing in a modern time with the advent of social media and the like. Before we get on to our kaupapa, I just want each of you to have a quick discussion about, well, just tell us who you are, your dog tag, your name tag, and where you are from. Ka pai.
Te hei Māori ora, tēnei te mahi nui ki a koutou katoa, ko Leonie Hayden toku ingoa, ko Tuhirangi te Manga, ko Kakanoi te Awa, ko Ngāti Whātua Kaipara te iwi, ko Ngāti Rango te Hapu. I'm the editor of Aotea, which is our Māori platform on the spinoff.co.nz, which is a current affairs website that only reports on and reflects what's happening here in New Zealand. Kia ora koutou.
Kia ora, ko Annabelle Lee May, the tōku ingoa, he uri ahau no Ngai Tahu me Ngāti Kahungunu. I produce the Hui for TV3. I used to work for Māori Television and for Ruia Mai Radio.
Kia ora tātou, ko Roihana Nuri tōku ingoa, ko tūhaurangi, ko Ngāti Piki au, ko Ngāti Tarawhai, ko tūhoi, ko te whānau apanui o ku iwi. I am the producer for TVNZ's political program, Q&A.
Awesome. Let's have a quick hands together for our panel. So I brought up the issue around Pātara Te Tuhi, and I brought it up on purpose because he was so effective as a writer and as somebody who wanted to change the environment and narrative of who we are as Māori at that time in 1862, that the government thought that they needed to interrupt and disrupt that sort of thinking fairly quickly. So they produced a thing called Te Pi Hoi Hoi, which was another newspaper to rival Te Hokioi, the Te Hokioi newspaper. So the power of the written word at that time was so important in delivering our messages that the government itself, or the Crown in fact, decided to put up an opposition newspaper, if you like. And here we are transported in 2019, over 100 years, 150 years later, where we are discussing what relevant platforms there are, I guess, to capture some of those key audiences so that our messages as Māori messages are delivered, are consumed in a way in which they can, on a platform that they can hear, readily available to them. So, without further ado, this is what was written for us. So broadcasters, formats, cultures and workflows are designed for different purposes. In the click and share world, pure digital players with fewer overheads, niche audience targets and new approaches have some major advantages, while the linear format can be seen as cumbersome and expensive. Journalism may be under threat as business models take precedence. In those business models, news is often a commodity. Newsrooms and investigative journalism can be seen as an expense that the organisation can ill afford. Digital news must rely on subscription, sponsors and partnership. While social media may create awareness, real political change requires actual decision making, which takes time and reflection. There's a clear danger in focusing on social media as the primary agenda-setting medium for public debates. Social media debates on politics and policy can quickly degrade into binary positions. I'm right, you're wrong, here's the link, I can prove it. So the first question to our panel, I guess, is this. So what does the current Aotearoa news landscape look like to you?
Well, coming as someone who works in the digital space only, it looks increasingly digital to me. I see our younger generations are increasingly only watching subscription-based media or free video media, so I'm talking about broadcasting here, or reading things online. I don't think the linear broadcasting space is going to be relevant in 20 years, which isn't to say it's not relevant now, because it very much is. But that's the trend that occurs to me. That I mean, I haven't been in this game for very long, but I feel like it has accelerated quickly. So surely it can only continue to do so at the same rate.
Annabelle, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do agree with that, and I think what you will about social media as television makers and news producers. We can't ignore it, but I guess it's about figuring out how to use it in a way that still produces meaningful content, but there's no point in producing meaningful content if the audience that it's intended for isn't consuming it. So it's about thinking of ways that we can make stories that our rangatahi will engage with, and that has to be done using, in the digital world.
I see you nodding, Roihana. It's an and?
Oh, I think so. I think that we've got to be cognizant of the fact that who our audiences are. So our people consume media in different ways, and if we understand that, some like to read, some like to watch a video, some do like to watch Q&A, and watch te karere. But I think when we fundamentally understand that, we're in a content war, let's make no mistake about that, and we've got to rise to the occasion. Just the session before this, they were talking about Getty's having sort of some rights to using some of the archives within TVNZ. As the producer for Q&A, we access Getty's quite a lot. For sports, you see the VidWar photos come off up the back. It's about, there's a whole lot of things that are converging now. We're going to be under siege. Can a new organisation manage the restrictions around the use of the stuff that we produce in terms of the content war? So there are those things. But we're coming back to actually who the audiences are and what content we're making.
Who are our audiences? Good question.
I don't know, but I wish they'd watch us more. Come over, 9:30 a.m. Sundays. I don't know, well, that's the thing is that, when you're making Māori programming, you have to make it for a diverse audience, and that's why I think, although we are moving increasingly into a digital sphere, linear is not dead yet, although sometimes I wonder if it would be cheaper just to buy everyone iPads.
So in terms of constructing news these days, is it a matter of constructing news? Because we see a lot of criticism around newsrooms now these days. I'm going off now just slightly. Going off just slightly in terms of constructing news rather than telling the news.
I personally think there's a space in between that, which is acknowledging different perspectives on the same subject, on the same news subject. So if you're choosing to present a news item or something that's in the headlines from a Māori perspective, you're not constructing that narrative, but at the same time it's not the same narrative that's being presented on the 6 o'clock news. I don't think Māori media practitioners in this country are in the habit of constructing news to get clicks, because our energy is devoted to bringing that perspective to our people. I think a lot of our mainstream news is about constructing news narratives, but I don't see that as being something that's embraced by our Māori media at all.
I guess it depends on what your idea of constructing news is too, because in some ways you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. If you're merely reacting to news and telling reactive news, then the criticism is that you're not setting the news agenda and breaking stories from a uniquely Māori perspective. I do think that, I don't know how you guys feel, but when I get one of those breaking news banners on my phone because Mike Hoskins has had another brain fart, that to me is constructing news. But I don't think that, or clickbait, but I think constructing news isn't necessarily a bad thing depending on what the news is.
A lot of our news is constructed outrage now, where I think as Māori media we don't need to invent that. You know, there's so much already in violence that's sort of directed at us that we don't need to pretend to be outraged about anything. If anything, we're out here not being outraged enough about quite a few things, you know. But
I think, first of all, we've got to focus on what we've got to do right. We haven't really got the model of te reo news in te reo, and I think we could do a lot better at that. Te karere, te kaya, all of those programs, we've got to figure it out, and I think the only way we can do that is by collaboratively talking, you know, amongst ourselves and the people in this room to be able to come up with better models and innovative models to ensure there is an uptake in terms of te reo, because I'm definitely one that believes that te reo absolutely rates. It's about what sort of content you make, and it's about making sure that you make the right type of content for the right type of platform.
I think that's the really cool thing about Netflix too, is that it's smashing our idea that monocultural, monolingual TV is the TV that rates, because, you know, you can sit through an entire series of Narcos and you've watched like an 80% Spanish program and not think of anything of it, or you're sparking your joy with Marie Kondo, you know, in Japanese and English, and I think that's the really cool thing that we're seeing Netflix do, and I think that creates space for Māori, not just in terms of news stories, but, you know, other types of productions and genres that we can do that too, and tell our stories in the reo in a way that people will engage with.
So I just want to pick up on their point on te reo Māori news. Where are we accessing the te reo Māori people or potential journalists to fill those positions? Because I've seen that as a huge hole over, not just recently, but over a wide range of years. So what do you guys think? How can we address that?
It's such an important issue, and, you know, there really is a paucity of Māori coming into the industry who have had some basic training, and, you know, Jason, you would have worked a lot over the years with all the amazing people that came through Whakaari and that, and there's no one that's filling that space at the moment. So then we have that situation where all of us are like swapping dance partners across television programs every 6 months, but it has to be that way because there's not enough new people coming in, and there's not enough money in our budgets where we can have a baby come in and sit and watch and learn. Like, everybody has to be pulling their weight as soon as they hit the ground. So I feel like it's really something that we have to think about as an industry. We have to encourage TMP and New Zealand On Air and others to also, you know, use their influence to put pressure on tertiary organisations or wānanga or someone to create a specifically Māori focused journalism course. And, like, for example, my baby's gone through kohanga kura kaupapa. Last year she enrolled at AUT to do the communications degree with an eye to probably majoring in journalism at the end of it. She was really muke from the time she got there. There was no real Māori options that she could take. She was the only Māori in the class. And I kept saying to her, hang in there, it'll be fine, you know, just get through, it'll be better next year. Anyway, she was sitting in class one day, and one of the kids that she was in class with her goes to the lecturer, I think it's really unfair the way Māori students still get prioritised in tertiary institutions. And the lecturer, who wasn't actually from Aotearoa originally, was like, I agree with you, I think it's so unfair. My daughter signed herself out at AUT that day and went over to Auckland University, and I'm gutted because I'd love my baby to be a journalist, but it's an important issue.
Leonie, in the advent of a world now where you advocate quite clearly for around the digital space, is there actually a need for us to train Māori-speaking journalists, or are there platforms already available for Māori-speaking trend setters, if you like? I
mean, not only is there a need, it's very much, as Annabelle says, the reason that we're in trouble. One thing that I get really frustrated when I'm trying to figure out how I can access some kind of funding from Te Māngai Pāpo is I feel like I'm constantly reminding them that Māori can read because all the money goes into broadcasting. And so I have to sort of try and figure out how I'm going to develop young Māori writers by myself. The only other sort of online written journalism platform for Māori is E Tangata. Both of us incredibly under-resourced, understaffed, under-resourced. So we're out here trying to figure out how to do this on our own. Every time I find a young Māori writer, they have been snatched by RNZ in under 6 months. 6 months to a year, and they're gone, which is awesome, you know. That means I'm clearly doing something a little bit right, but that also means that they stop writing. They get into sort of like churning out daily news, and then they end up on the radio. And again, great for their career, but that's where that writing development stopped, and I have to start from the beginning again. And I'm talking only like, if I'm lucky, one young person a year, and I've only been doing this for sort of 6 years, and you know, that cycle is really frustrating, especially because there's no support there in the infrastructure. And I want to see, like Annabelle, I want to see it start at school. I want to see it start in our tertiary institutions where we're supporting young Māori to explore writing or broadcasting or wherever their strengths lie. In Te Reo, and also in Te Reo Pākehā, because there are ways of expressing your Māoritanga if you don't have the reo in our media that are also really important.
You were chomping at the bit there for a little while.
Oh, no, what I was going to say, if we can't get the Te Reo Māori journalism platform sorted, and, you know, so that our people can read Te Reo, that our people who can converse, do talk, because everyone seems to think that all the money is going towards Te Reo. Te Reo is Te Reo. If you're getting funded to do Te Reo and you're doing 90%, 96% English, that's still English. And what I'm saying is that we need to really sit down, have a proper conversation. If we need to get Te Reo right, so that, you know, look, once upon a time, and I want to acknowledge Auntie Tini, when I was a kid in Rotorua, she was on the screen, this Māori lady, you know, same sort of colour skin as me, from Tūhoe as well, and I aspired to be like that. There was a lot of energy in that generation because they were on screen, and now we seem to have lost something along the way. And could I point out, there have been so many conditions from the various number of funders that choke our innovativeness and also that stop us from actually being Māori in the 21st century and getting on with the job of getting the content, competing on an international scale. Because I tell you what, our newsrooms in TVNZ, and I've produced a number of those programs inside that newsroom, they want Māori talent because either they're the victim or the perpetrator. They also tell the story much better. They look better on the camera, and I've managed to put those sort of things in there. They're also better on panels because they say a lot of things and there's no restrictions, you know. So I'm just sort of saying that let's figure out, and there's so many smart people and talented people sitting in this room for us to be able to sit down and come together to get that right. We do not have a news platform where our kids can read in Te Reo. We've got thousands of English news website platforms. We don't have one of those. I'm not sure why, but hey, that's my input there.
One of the other issues too is, like I am critical of other mainstream news organisations because not only is there like a dearth of Māori reporters, but in terms of Māori being in editorial positions, there's none of that. But nowadays you can't even blame them because there's just not enough Māori coming through. But I think that's a really important issue, as well as making sure that Māori are in editorial positions and decision-making positions in mainstream newsrooms, so that they're not just reporting about Māori or sending their one Māori reporter to court to do that story and then, ripping the guts out of their Māori angles and that. So that's another thing that we need to give consideration to as well.
One of the practices that I've seen over the last decade or so, working on the other side, the dark side, has been times when TV stations have sent cameramen to talk to my talent, to my people that I'm looking after. I have said to producers at the time that I find that extremely offensive, that cameramen are now doing interviews, and I'm being purposely to do our stories. do you guys, as people who sit in the hot seat, how do you see that? Do you take responsibility for that?
I think there's certain responsibility individual producers of programs, but you've got to look at the fact that the grind in terms of daily and our ability to get all of the news stories to present a counter narrative to the grand narrative of Māori are bad, sad and mad, we've got to have the resources to be able to do and send the reporters to those to your organisation to pick those stories up. Let's be real here. I can't send a camera and a reporter to Te Kuiti because it's going to take out so much of a resource when I'm trying to put a daily program to air. So, or if we're talking about allocating resources throughout the thing, it's really a resource issue, and we need more than the current funder that funds us in terms of current affairs. We need to have lots of strategic partnerships to be able to figure that so that we have the resources and ability to get to all the stories, because one story in one region is not better than the other, it's just that it's more accessible.
Yeah, I mean, I understand why people get hoha with that sort of thing, but like Roihana, I guess that's, that's what happens because all of the networks have like de-invested out of the regions. So nowadays, if you are to send one, it means taking a reporter out for pretty much a whole day, whereas before when there was a lot more regional hubs and you could send people to do that. So I see both sides of the argument there. I realise why it's hoha, particularly for Māori, and especially if it's a Pākehā cameraman that doesn't get the kaupapa, but I equally sympathise with producers like Roihana that have to make those hard decisions.
No view on that one.
It's not my area.
Telling stories, the art of telling a story. Has that changed over the last 10 years, 20 years, 5 years, in fact, with the wide range now of options that people have to consume news? The art of telling that story over multiple platforms, because I know that is a huge demand now on news teams to do the story, follow it up with a social media post and the like. More pressure?
Oh, absolutely. Look, we were just talking about Getty image rights and stuff like that. Sometimes we're going to download a photo from Getty's and we post that on Facebook. We post that on an online written version of the news, while we still have to also do the linear program, put that out by the deadline. So we've got a number of deadlines, and we've really got to juggle which one is in terms of priority. So it's always, so in terms of TVNZ, it's like News Now, post it when you've got it available. So there is huge pressure, and I think we just need to come up with strategies and plans to be able to manage the pressure and have proper conversations in managing our resources, because they're small.
I feel like the elements of a good story are the same no matter what type of platform or what era that you're making it in. So although I guess the way we craft maybe and the platforms that it goes on are the same, I still feel like the elements of what makes a great story are timeless.
Yeah.
One thing I do miss is the long form story in Māori media. Up until 2 years ago, I was the editor of Mana magazine, and so every issue, of course, we had long form feature stories, and I'm a big fan of that, and there's just, because everything else is so urgent in this media landscape, getting news out there before everyone else, and telling stories in a way that we know people's attention spans are better suited to. We've sort of lost the art of that longer story, which is also why I really love Whakaari for those long episodes as well. But yeah, long feature stories, I think it'd be nice to see those come back into the mix, because I feel like that's sort of more in line with how we as Māori tell stories, like go through a journey, learn about the history of something, and you can't fit that into something that you can watch in a minute and a half,
I think the fact that people can spend like an entire weekend binging the first series of Making a Murderer shows that we do actually have the concentration spans
Exactly.
to be able to sit through longer stuff or read through longer stuff. It's just we've got to craft those stories to be engaging so people want to.
Do you think we should accept the notion that 25, 15-year age group of people actually don't want to receive news the way in which we've been delivering it for the last 20 years?
When I was 18, I just didn't want to watch the news at all, you know. So I don't know if the format really changes how engaged young people are with current affairs. But saying that, this week has been a good example of how we might be underestimating modern youth and their desire to understand what's going on around them a bit better, because they're obviously incredibly clued up about climate change, and so much so they're willing to sort of take to the streets about it. But yeah, I mean, you can't sort of force those demographics to care, and I don't think it really depends on how it's delivered. I guess it's just what you're saying is more important than how.
I think that we shouldn't also be ostriches with our heads in the sand around what our people want and what they expect of us in terms of news and current affairs content providers and makers. And look, I'll put my Te Aroa FM board hat on here. There's a definite opportunity to be able to work collaboratively with the iwi stations whilst we've gone centralised back into the main newsrooms, resourcing, whatever, for whatever reason, to be able to do that. And from a Te Aroa worldview, the audience is Te Aroa. So I think we need to come back to connect with our own people, start making sure, do our people, and are they telling me that we've got the news right there? Because if we sort of looked at that audience and we understood that audience and the different demographics within that audience, would be able to provide news that they, better news. And, look, Q&A, for instance, we had to move from Sunday mornings to Sunday evenings to Monday evenings, 9:30 TVNZ1, because the funder isn't interested in really funding longer format current affairs programs. So it's a sort of a survival move to sort of stay with the trends because everything is shrinking. So I made a couple of points.
I want to pick up on that point. There are 26 iwi stations, close to.
Yep.
Do we need to look at that model?
Yes.
When you say yes, what does that look like? And I know you can't give a entirely...
I can give a Te Aroa perspective, and that's the fact that we recognise that the other iwi stations have mana motuhake in terms of where they're at in the progress, in the development of that station. They're also moving towards some online platform mahi as well, so they're trying to deliver to their people with the same resource that they've been given, or trying to bid within the current tender rounds of new funds that are being made available. So you've got stations like Te Huku. I'm not talking on their behalf, but in terms of where we are at Te Aroa, we're definitely moving there. We've started a news service in our Karere Aotearoa, and overwhelmingly our population of 70,000, some numbers are inflated, have already told me that hearing Te Aroa issues and Te Aroa views and news is absolutely resonating. That's just from our station, and that was Te Aroa FM and Tūwharetoa FM coming together to broadcast those bulletins and then making those bullies Te Aroa-centric available on podcasts so all of Te Aroa throughout the world can listen.
What do you think, Bells?
Well, as someone who doesn't work in the iwi radio space, I don't want to tell them what I think they should be doing. I just think that the value of the service that they provide shouldn't be underestimated, and they are our ahika and Māori broadcasting. They do keep our mita, our reo alive. They are the gateway for a lot of young people into the industry. So anything we can do that supports their sustainability and future-proofs them, I think is a good thing, and long may they be around.
So I'm going to push this a bit more then, on purpose. So if we extend that view to around radio, because I'm going to ask the same question around TV, in terms of the various smorgasbord of options that are available on both Māori television and state television and others, is there a need now to start looking at how we rationalise that model to deliver, given that you've just told me that there aren't enough reporters around, and if there are no reporters around to service multiple platforms, do we need to have a look at that model? Bells, you work there.
Yes, we do.
Before ladies.
I think we need to definitely look at the model. We need to understand the burden on our iwi stations to still deliver what they have to deliver as prescribed in their contracts, and then we expect them to do a hell of a lot more. So there's this level of expectation in terms of the stations, but I think that if we resource them, look, we've all got the same issues, we've all got the same barriers, and iwi Radio no exception. I listened to this morning's session and understood that this is about storytelling, but we've got similar barriers in terms of underfunding, under-resource, and the fact we keep on stealing people between the broadcasters. So, you know, Te Karere reporters end up at Te Kai reporters end up at Te Karere. Where are we growing our future broadcasters and our future news reporters and journalists? So do some of us stop doing the mahi that we're doing because we're trying to advocate for more Māori voices, for more, for a diverse voice in terms of mainstream? I'm at the point now where I'm in mainstream because I think I can do a better job at least getting our voice. It might be a small voice in the big wide world, but at least I'm there to be able to advocate. If I wasn't there, then we'd be submerged. So, sorry, I digressed. But
you avoided the question, is what you did.
iwi Radio, we need to support, and I think we also need to give back because we've been doing what we've been doing. I've just stayed in my lane actually, so that I didn't get told off.
Pels.
I don't know in terms of iwi Radio, but in terms of television, I've always thought that competition is a really good thing, and I think that when Te Kaya came along, that it made Te Karere even better, and they in turn made us better, and having that wairua whakataetai in the very best sense of the word was a really wonderful thing. But I also realise that the landscape has changed so dramatically in the last 15 years that if we want to stay relevant and agile and well-resourced and engaging into the future, that we are going to have to do some soul-searching about what that looks like. So I think it's important that the conversation is had, and that for once we pull our gang patches off and talk about what is going to be the very best platform or model of delivery to do that, because otherwise we're going to get completely left behind. And if you look at what's happening in mainstream, stuff is trying to merge with the Herald, and everyone's trying to get in bed with each other, and there's a reason that that's happening, and that's because the economics of it demand it, and given that we have the smallest pūtea of all, it's something that we need to consider as well.
What about in that online space? Because I know that you're not constrained in that digital space with some of the constraints that we have on traditional broadcasting.
I guess in what I do, I'm lucky in that I can do whatever I want. And unfortunately, the downside is one of the main reasons I can do whatever I want is because I am not receiving any kind of state funding, so I'm not beholden to any of those kinds of guidelines, which there's a freedom and then there are constrictions within that. I will say this about current events television, Māori current events television, is I personally like that there is a range of shows and perspectives within Te Ao Māori that I can access, and like Andrew says, I think competition makes everyone stronger. I do know that there's some talk around the Māori Media Review of an alternate model looking a little bit like a centralised digital platform that everyone contributes to, and then that sort of feeds into radio and television and online Māori news and current affairs. And I'll just state for the record now, I hate that idea. Because if you have one centralised platform, then that creates gatekeepers, right? And so you're taking away the freedom of Māori creatives and newsmakers all around the country to do whatever the hell they want without, you know, these constrictions. And I just think it's a terrible idea, but yeah, bit off topic.
I've got a slightly different, I don't think integration versus rationalisation is necessarily a bad thing. And in terms of whakataita, I think potentially rather than competing with each other, we compete against our mainstream counterparts. I think that's actually a really good thing, to school them on how you tell great Māori stories and to be going up against them. So it's a complicated one. On one hand, I think, you know, we need to integrate to survive, and then on the flip side, I think there's a real vulnerability when it all sits upon one organisation. Plus then you've got the issue of what happens if there's, you know, political interference, or, you know, a government comes into power that wants to scrap funding altogether, or that sort of stuff. So there's vulnerabilities in being just one, but there's also strengths in it. So it's a big conversation that we need to have. I don't think that the Māori Media Review has been given enough time to adequately drill down into all of the issues and really analyse them and give them consideration. So I'm kind of concerned about what that's going to mean for us, because I think we do have to start making some bold decisions quickly.
What do you think? The Māori Media Review? Because I think that is a really good place to, because we've only got about 3 minutes left now, to finish off on that review, given that they're here in the next hour or so. Next. So, quick, your views on that.
I've put it through my own submission, but basically I don't think TPK is the right organisation to be reviewing us. We should review ourselves.
Bells?
Basically, just what I said before, I'm concerned about the time frames and the way it's being rolled out and conducted, and I'm not sure if we're going to get the right information we need at the end of it to make the big important decisions that we need to make, unfortunately.
Right. Yeah, I'm also not sure that the right questions have been asked during this review. I'm not sure they know that Māori can read and write, and I'm also just want to see a lot of the boxes that need to be ticked when you're trying to access funding disappear, because I think they're prohibitive, and it means people create a product within that rather than what they want to, and I think we should be investing in people rather than productions, personally.
It's a great way to end. Nō reira koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. O te rā ki a koutou, ngā mema o te aho Whakaari, ka mihi ake rā ki a koutou katoa.